what I hopefully can bring to you guys are some perspectives on ways that social studies can be a little more focused, a little more centered on the Mexican American identity of our students, or the Central American identity of our students, because we have so many students from Central America as well, right? Before we do that, I really want to take some time to deepen the discussion that Joy and Stephanie were just having with you. So if you don't mind, I'm going to take about half an hour to deal with things that are perhaps like broader than the specifics I want to get into afterwards, just so that we're really clear about the footing that we're starting on. Everybody in their mind, if they are at an elementary or middle school, especially or high school in Texas, has the STAR exam hanging over them like a Damocles sword. It's like this really irritating thing, right? And so much of the bottom line in education has to do with state testing. And as a result, there's this huge worry from pencil pushers in our educational system about the gap between the performance of Mexican American students and students who are not Mexican American. According to the National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, 1/3 of Latinx students in the United States perform below grade level. Now, I'm going to use this word a lot, Latinx. Hopefully you know, if you've seen Latinx or Latinx, it's a gender-neutral way of saying Latino. If you're not familiar with it, that's all it is. Just instead of saying Latino student, which kind of implies that they're all male, I say Latinx, right? All right. Now, there are multiple reasons for the gap, according to a lot of specialists, and a lot of studies have been done. And people point to things like social issues, whether it's societal inequities or social attitudes within the communities about education. And people want to blame the social structures within the Mexican American community, for example, for the gap. Or people will say economic issues are at fault. There's not enough money being invested, and I certainly agree that there's not enough money being invested, but that's like, they want it to be the end-all, do-all. Or, a lot of these children come from poor families, and as a result, they don't have the same, resources to address their educational shortcomings. And then, of course, a lot of people point to systemic issues, and I think that there's a lot to be said about the systemic, like the hegemonic structure of education in the United States, the way it was established more than 100 years ago, and like how the vestiges of the inherent racism of the educational system are still having an impact on students today. All those things are true, but I would venture to suggest that those are not things that are going to close the gap. First of all, they're really difficult to address. They're huge. They're things that you as a teacher can't have no control over, right? It's, you're not going to be able to change the way the United States manages education. It's going to take generations of really, really aggressive activism. But progressive scholars come back again and again to one of the single biggest barriers, which is whether or not students' culture is reflected and centered in both the taught and hidden curriculum. So the taught curriculum is what you are deliberately setting out to teach, and the hidden curriculum is all the stuff that students pick up that you don't say, but that is, kind of implied by the way you teach and by the things that they're supposed to read and so forth. So how can we then ensure that students see themselves as academic learners, readers, writers, historians? These are things that are important. The gap comes, according to this viewpoint, because students do not see themselves as academic learners or readers or writers or scholars. It seems strange for them to think of themselves as that because of their ethnic identity, right? How do we begin to fight against that? Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, this is a very, very famous quote from her. She's a scholar of literacy for children. And some years ago at a conference, she said this that's been picked up by all kinds of people and used again and again in lots of scholarship. Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange. These windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created and recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us. And in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of the larger human experience. Reading then becomes a means of self-affirmation, self-affirmation, and readers often seek mirrors and books. And I would argue that education itself, the experience in the classroom, can either be a window or sliding glass door or a mirror, or all three things at one time. And if we're not thinking about that, if we're not careful about the way we set up what we do in the classroom, we can end up only offering students windows and never mirrors. What happens to students if they don't see themselves reflected in the work that they do? Latinx kids need to see need to see their lives, their families, their communities, and their culture as worthy of academic study, as valuable and integral parts of not just school life, but of school work, which is what Joy and Stephanie were talking about when they mentioned some schools get the cultural celebration part right, but they're missing this entire other chunk, which is potentially even more impactful, and that is seeing your life and your culture as worthy of study, worthy of being taught and discussed and analyzed in an academic setting. If all of these students are exposed to a sort of generic, homogenous, white American worldview in history, they begin to internalize and view themselves as unworthy, lesser, and marginalized. Now, why do I say generic, homogenous, white American culture? Because here's the really ugly thing about whiteness. Whiteness is not just harmful to people of color. Whiteness is harmful to white people, because there's no such thing as this homogenous culture. It's all a sham. It's all made up. If you think about, somebody growing up in rural Minnesota and somebody growing up in, Rhode Island, those places geographically, in terms of the people who settled there, in terms of the way they speak, their accents, their stories, their folklore, they're very different. Whiteness has told the people in these two places, you can have more power in our society if you pretend not to be part of the specific geographic rootedness that your culture has, but as a bigger culture, the white culture. We will give you power, we will give you privilege, but you have to abandon the specifics of your heritage. And this is, when people have bought into this down the centuries, there's a price that they've paid. There is a huge reward. And that kind of whiteness was dangled in the face of Latin Americans in the early 20th century as well. And it was the mid 20th century when Mexican Americans specifically began to fight back against that and say, no, we're not going to buy into whiteness. We're not going to sell our souls so that you can consider us white. And that's, where things like taking the word Chicano, which was originally kind of meant as an insult, and then using it as a self-affirmation and empowering kind of label, come from. So, at the risk of getting way too activist and progressive for some of you guys, let's take a look at something that gives us a concrete example of how this works. Here are the books that were published for kids in 2015, fiction and nonfiction books published for kids in 2015. When we break it down, you'll see that less than 1% were centered on, had as protagonist or as the main focus of the book, Native Americans. 2.4% had Latinx kids or culture at the heart. 3.3% had Asian Americans or Pacifica at the heart. 7.6% had African Americans at the heart. 12.5 had animals and trucks and anthropomorphic animals, right? 73.3 were centered on white culture. They had white protagonists, talked about predominantly white kinds of cultural things. This means the poor Native American girl, she's got a little compact mirror. The Mexicano trae su espejo así bien triste. And the mirrors get progressively bigger. The bunny has got a full-length mirror, and the white kid is surrounded by mirrors. He's got a freaking disco ball hanging over his head, right? He sees himself everywhere he looks. He is the center of the publishing world. And you can imagine what it feels like to be one of these kids and be in a classroom where all these mirrors are reflecting him, and if they're lucky, they get to see a glimpse of themselves in a mirror sometimes from time to time. 3 years later, these are what the numbers were last year. So it seems a little bit better. We've gone up to 1% for Native Americans. It moved up 0.1%. Latinx has doubled in the 3 years in terms of our cultural content. Asian American Pacifica kind of stagnant. African American representation has gone up about 2.5 percentage points. Animals are having a wonderful time. They're now up to 27% of friggin' representation in books, right? Animals, trucks, and stuff like that. And white representation has come down somewhat, but it's still 50%. Still 50% of what's out there. But you'll see a lot of that shifted from white to animals because what happened? Yeah, what happened is a lot. This is so depressing, but this is the truth. I'm going to be honest with you all the time. I am deeply, deeply embedded in the world of children's publishing. What has happened is that white authors, feeling excoriated publicly for writing so many books about white people, have decided to start writing about anthropomorphic animals and trucks and stuff like that. All right, yay. See, it isn't enough, by the way, to increase the mirrors in students' lives, to add more mirrors. Students need access to mirrors that are made by people like them. That's the tricky part. Because if John Green, you guys know who John Green is, right? The Fault in Our Stars, the really super famous author who writes best-selling novels. If he decides tomorrow, oh snap, not enough Mexican Americans in books, I'm gonna write a book about Mexican, and John Green doesn't know anything about Mexican Americans. You know, maybe he's got like a friend, or maybe like his maid is Mexican American, whatever, right? And he's like, I'm going to write, my new YA novel is gonna be centered on a Chicana and their experiences. He's gonna screw it up. He's gonna screw it up. It's not going to accurately and truly represent Mexican American culture, right? What we need is like the Mexican American equivalent of John Green to write a book that has a Chicana as the protagonist. Somebody like, Erika Sanchez in her book, I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter, which is, to my mind, at the same level of quality and impact. So how can Latinx kids see themselves as readers, writers, historians, if we don't expose them to Latinx writers and historians, right? Because I said earlier that their culture needs to be something that they see as worthy of academic study, but not by some like weird anthropologist who's like, I am now among the Mexican Americans, and take field notes about what the Mexican Americans are doing, all their weird little ceremonies, and no, because then that others are experiencing makes it something that's strange and exotic instead of something that's perfectly human and normal and part of our lives and our identities, right? This attempt, or this insistence that our stories be told by us and not by other people, is called own voices, hashtag own voices, literally hashtag own voices, because it emerges as a movement on Twitter. Does anybody use Twitter? You guys, you're like, I'm a teacher, I have time to be on Twitter. It tells us something about you, Bowles, that you use Twitter so much. Not a lot of free time on your hands. Maybe the B3 Institute needs to saddle you with some more work. But yeah, Twitter is a place where a lot of this kind of activism is going on, especially in for kids lit. A lot of Latinx authors, scholars are on Twitter all the time, sharing resources, having conversations. It is definitely not Facebook. It's like a completely different world. It's sometimes a very scary world because you put something out there and you get maniacs that jump onto your thread and start saying really bizarre things. Luckily, you can just block them or mute them and never have to see them again. But it is a really, really interesting world. So back in 2015, Karine Duvis, who is a children's writer, said, glad important discussions are being had, would love to be able to walk away with book recommendations. How about a hashtag? And then she created it, hashtag own voices, to recommend Kidlit about diverse characters written by authors from that same diverse group. And it blew up into an entire movement. And now, 4 years later, because things move really fast, and some of you might go, 4 years? How can you have a movement 4 years? On the internet you can. In 4 years you can have movements rise and fall in 4 years, right? It's really, really, it's like the life cycle of a bumblebee or something. It's super, super fast. Now, you might ask yourself, well, David, isn't diversity enough? I mean, should it be enough that we bring in the diversity into the classroom? Who cares who it's written by, right? And there is something to be said for that. I mean, as an initial step, before you can get the publishing industry to start publishing nonfiction and fiction books written by Latinx authors, you might need that stopgap. But in short, it isn't enough. There's a long history of majority group authors, white, able, straight, male, etc., writing outside their experience to tell diverse stories. Sometimes the books they create are wonderful, like if they are allies of that group, if they spend a lot of time. And a perfect example is Joseph Bruchac. Has anybody ever seen a book by, not Joseph Bruchac, Joe Hayes?
Yes.
Yeah, Joe Hayes, right? Joe Hayes has that great book, The Legend of the Kukui. Yeah, huh? Kids love that book. Now, Joe Hayes is bilingual. I mean, the man, I know him really well. He's like almost 80, or maybe he is 80. He's like an old dude.
Oh my goodness.
Super hard of hearing. To like get up and say, Joe! And he's like super tall, so like I just stand up, Joe! But he grew up in New Mexico in a Mexican American community. He is not Mexican American at all, but he is a huge ally of the Mexican American community, what we might even call an accomplice. Because sometimes we don't need allies, we need accomplices. We need people that are in the ditches with us doing the work, and this often subversive work of pushing against the system, right? So there is a really, really great Native American scholar. Her name is Debbie Reese, and she does a lot of work on making sure that teachers know about good Native American representation. She's a Nambe Pueblo nation member. And she talked in a speech a few years ago about this idea of the people that are outside of our community that we want writing about our community are the people that we would entrust our children to. She says, would you let them hold your babies? If you would, then they can write about us because they know us well enough that we're willing to trust them with their babies. That's okay. No one is saying that people who are not Mexican American should not write about Mexican American experience. But you need to know the Mexican American experience to do it, right? It's not impossible, but it is really, really hard. Of course, the biggest problem here is that marginalized people get their stories taken from them, misused, published as authentic, while marginalized authors have to jump hurdle after hurdle to be published themselves, fighting to receive even a fraction of the pay, promotion, and praise that outsiders get for writing diverse character stories, if they're allowed through the door at all. Because there's a barrier. There's definitely a series of gatekeepers there. So why does this matter? Because even when portrayals of diverse characters by majority group authors are respectful and accurate, there's an extra degree of nuance and authority. The authority is super important. That comes with writing from a lived experience. You can tell the difference. You can tell the difference. Like both the Tomás Rivera and Pura Pre committee in talking about my book, Le Fami Güero, were like, one of the things that is so moving about it is that it's clearly a lived experience. The author clearly understands and has lived through the things that he's describing. And that's what makes a difference, because kids catch that. Kids are no fools. They know cuando les está sudando el dedo en la boca, right? They get that kind of stuff. They know if you're trying to pull the wool over their eyes. Lone Voices books have an added richness because the author shares an identity with the character, the deepest understanding of the intricacies, the joys, the difficulties, the pride, the frustration, every other possible facet of that particular life, because the author's actually lived it. And you can't fake that. You can't fake it. But here's the really, really cool thing for those of us who are even in a dual language program who have students who are not Mexican American, who are not Latinx, is that research shows that both children of color and white children benefit from greater exposure to inclusive literature, especially Lone Voices books that accurately reflect our diverse society. That white kid who's surrounded by all those mirrors in that graphic, he needs to be looking through the windows into the mirrors of those other kids. He needs that. It's going to enrich his life. It's going to make him more empathetic. It's going to make him a better human being, more likely to better coexist with the people of color around him. One of the reasons that our society is in such turmoil right now is because a huge segment, 50% arguably, of our society goes through school and grows up without any kind of exposure to any culture other than that homogenous white culture that I was talking about. At least in any kind of significant, meaningful way. I mean, they get the cute, acting like sidekick, or the wisecracking African-American friend who gets killed first in horror movies, or, that magical Negro trope of like the old, wise African-American woman who gives advice to the characters and they go off and they're really successful and they're all white, right? We get those little flashes of like not particularly respectful representation. But for the most part, people are not being exposed to the experiences of people outside of their own little bubble. So we have to move past silly policies and procedures that focus on a numbers game or only on literature that has made it past the principal gatekeepers. There's a lot of libraries that are not even allowed to acquire some of these books because they have to be like on a bestseller list or they have to be published by one of the big five. Or there are all these like hurdles that school districts themselves, Mexican-American controlled school districts, put up to keep diverse literature out of the hands of teachers and students. And arguably, I would say that here in the Rio Grande Valley, we need to be centering Mexican-American voices. All right. I want to give you a little more perspective on this. So there was no viable body of literature for and about U.S. Latinos until the 1970s and 1980s. Can you imagine that? Nothing. We're going to take a look at the couple of titles that were published. But a body of literature for kids, nothing. In 1994, there was this attitude that was coming out. And two scholars, Roberto Rodriguez and Patricia Gonzalez, said many publishers not only find our writing unacceptable, they can't read it. Here's this really interesting thing. If all you do is read that like white pablum that is produced by the publishing industry that's so generic in terms of culture, and it's all got the very same voice, and it feels like it could have been written by the same author, because that's what editors do. They're like, oh, we need to sell, so it needs to be written a certain way. You read something that's written in a voice that's different from that, something like Gloria Anzaldúa, and publishers are like, what the hell is this? This is, I don't even, like the voice is so weird, the structure is so strange to them, they can't even process it. And that was what was happening, because we had like this huge, explosion in the Latinx population in the 80s and early 90s, and publishers couldn't do anything about it because when they got, manuscripts submitted to them, they were just written in a way that made no sense to these people who had only read, what the white publishing industry put out. Preference instead was given to Latin American and Spanish books in translation because the Latin American countries, differently than Latinos in the U.S., tended to write in a kind of like really structured European fashion that when translated, felt a little bit more like what you would be expecting from these books. Chicano, U.S. Latino voices are very different than that super educated, you guys have read, you know what I'm talking about. You're bilingual teachers, you've read books that have been published in Latin America, and there's a difference between the voices, right? When Latino kids began to emerge, it came from established writers for adults. People like Gary Soto, Rudy Anaya, Sandra Cisneros, and so forth. And they often weren't even trying to write for kids. They were just trying to write books about what it was like to be a kid in the U.S., to be a Latinx kid. Even then, there was this corrosive anti-culture attitude that people used to try to dismiss it and to not give any precedence to it, any kind of importance to it. U.S. teens have little interest in their own traditions and almost none in anyone else's. That's what the New York Times Book Review said in 1986. Why do they not have interest in their own traditions? Because, like I said, whiteness strips the geographic specificity of individual groups that are, nominally white from them. And so kids lose interest in that kind of stuff because they're all just trying to be this homogenous sameness. So let's take a really quick look at what was happening in the early 20th century. In the 20s and 30s, exotic locales and folklore, folktales, that was what you would see in books. They were mostly written by non-Latinos. One exception, a super important exception was Perez and Martina, a Puerto Rican, it's literally spelled Puerto Rican folktale. I'm not just pronouncing it like Trump, it's like literally written that way. That was written by Pura Belpré. Pura Belpré was a Boricua who was a librarian at the New York Public Library. And she was hugely influential in the development of an authentic Latinx children's literature. That book was published originally in 1932. In the 40s, you had this perpetuation of stereotypes. The stereotypes of the burro, the sombrero, the siesta, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. And there was the couple of exceptions. One of them was The Boy Who Could Do Anything and Other Mexican Folktales, that was written by Anita Brenner, who was a historian who had been born in Mexico, who then turned to writing folktales. And so there was something more authentic about that. You also had Leo Politi, who was an Italian American, who was an accomplice and an ally. When he moved to Southern California, he lived in the Mexican American part of town, and I think it was Los Angeles, and fell in love with the culture. And so he wrote books and illustrated them. But unfortunately, when you look back at them, that he perpetuates some stereotypes, just because people weren't particularly woke at the time, and he just wasn't really good at processing those stories and making them. But he won the Caldecott Award, which is for illustration, and the Caldecott Honor a couple times as well. In the 50s, I don't know. Well, I was about to say I don't know how familiar you are with this, but you guys teach social studies, so well, maybe you are. In the 30s and halfway through the 40s, there was this thing called the Good Neighbor Policy, which was about FDR was like, we need to respect Latin American countries, we need to see them as equals, we need to have cultural interchange with them, da 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 da. Well, that was over by the end of the 40s, and so in the 50s, as this policy is revoked, there's an understanding of Latin American countries as resources to be extracted, right? You have banana republics and all this kind of stuff. We're letting our corporations go down and just like suck economic and actual physical resources out of these countries. And as a result, what begins to happen is that the books that are about these areas make them seem super appealing in that kind of way as potential resources. Books like Secret of the Andes by Anne Nolan Clark and Now Miguel by Joseph Crumble, they both won Newbery Awards, which are like the best books for children at the time. But if you read them now, you will be appalled at the way they paint these countries as needing the guiding hand of Uncle Sam, right? Que vengan los estadounidenses a ayudarnos porque no sabemos, somos unos idiotas. It's really like a kind of this disgusting treatment of people in Latin America as like infantile and like needing the mature leadership of the United States, right? In the 60s, were definitely ethnocentric and problematic. These books show Latinx kids as incapable of taking care of themselves without the help of whites. So what happens is, in these books, you typically have some Mexican-American kid who's having trouble at school, he's very problematic and so forth. When he finally decides to learn English and assimilate, his problems go away. They're message books about the need for assimilation. And they did like terrible work in trying to push back against the counterculture and Chicano movement and so forth. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that we began to experience these winds of change. Tomás Rivera publishes Y no se lo trago la tierra from the very short-lived Quinto Sol publishing house out of Berkeley. It only existed for about 3 years, but in those 3 years, it opened the door to something people hadn't thought about at all. Like truly representative Latinx literature for young people. Tomás Rivera wasn't thinking about kids, about like writing books for kids when he wrote this, but this book has become one of the most important children's books in our country. It was followed a year later by Rudy Anaya's Bless Me Ultima. And Bless Me Ultima is one of the books that, like, when you talk to Mexican-American authors who write for young people, you say, like, what was one of the books that inspired you? They will mention Bless Me Ultima, and then they will also mention The House on Mango Street by Samuel Cisneros, which definitely was not written for kids, but the vignettes from it are used in elementary school all the time. 4th or 5th grade, you see people using some of the vignettes from that book. And then Gary Soto in 1990 publishes Baseball in April, and it is super influential, and it kind of marks like a pivot time as we move to the 90s. And in the 90s, a couple of book awards are set up. The book awards draw attention, they create a list, they give librarians something to hang on to, teachers some kind of validity in their selection of books that they can present before a school board. They are super important. So you have the Americas Award for Children and Young Adult Literature, established in 93, the Tomás Rivera Mexican American Children's Book Award came out in 94, and in 96 the Puerto del Pre is established. Almost done with this quick overview. I told you it'd be about half an hour. Almost on the other side of it, and then we'll take a quick decompress break to talk amongst yourselves about some stuff. So when we take a look at the number of inclusive books for kids with protagonists or subject matter that is centered on people of color, all together, you can see that in 1994, when we started keeping track of it, 10% of books published for kids had that. And 20 years later, 2013, we were still at 10%. Okay. Things hadn't moved very much at all. It was really in 2014 that some important gains began. We got moved to 14%. In 2015, the percentage jumps to 20%. I showed you that infographic at the very beginning of the presentation. In 2016, the number doubles over the 2014 number to 28%. And then there's a slight decline in 2017 to 25, and then last year declined to 23. There are problems with this. Think about how our society is actually set up, like the actual demographics of society. 37% of the U.S. population are people of color, which includes all these groups right here. 50% of the school-age population, 50% of kids in schools in the United States are of color. 26% of them are Latinx. So, like, you think about it, 26%, and then we saw on the infographic that only 7% of the books, or no, it's 5%. It's a huge disparity, right? 68% of those Latinx kids are Mexican American, but the hugest group. About 1/3 or 18 million of the nation's Latinx population is younger than 23. They're what we call Gen Z, right? I'm going to annoy you for a moment because I find this annoying. When older people look at like younger people, go, "Oh, these damn millennials," I'm like, dude, those are not millennials, those are Gen Z. Millennials are like 23 to 38 years old now. Some of them are going to be grandparents. They're not millennials. We're talking about Gen Z. Okay? The more you know. Knowledge is power. About 15 million of all Latinx are ages 23 to 38. It's a young population, and they have children, obviously, that are school age for the most part. Now, and here's the clincher. That increase that we saw is not what you think. Let's zone in on 2017. I don't have the numbers for 2018 yet, but in 2017, Black, Latinx, Asian, Pacific, and Native authors combined authored, so we're now talking about own voices, only 476 or 13% of the 3,700 books that were published for kids, as opposed to the 938 books or 25% that were written about people of color. So this increase that we're seeing is almost entirely white authors writing about Latinx issues, and not more Latinx authors writing about them. White authors have been prioritized by the publishing industry, and over own voices, 29% of books with Black protagonists were written by Black authors. That means 71% were written by people who weren't Black, right? 34% of books with Latinx protagonists were written by Latinx authors, so 66 were written by other people. So you see the problem, right? This is definitely an issue. So the immediate future doesn't look all that much, doesn't look brighter, because the deals that are announced like every Tuesday in the trades they're low again this year. Like there are about 6 deals per month for Latinx authors, which is just 10% of the overall number of new contracts. Which means that when they announce that a book has been purchased, it's usually like 2 to 3 years before that book comes out, maybe 1 if you're lucky. That means that for the next 2 to 3 years, we're still going to be seeing these numbers, still low own voices kinds of things. And you hear authors of color, friends of mine, they hear the same thing again and again when they submit a manuscript and it gets rejected or they get pushed back, whatever. A lot of things that they hear are the voice and dialogue don't ape the industry, but they'll never say ape it, but they say this sounds weird because the way we talk, the language we use is different from other places, right? An overuse of Spanish, like my book, The Smoking Mirror, was rejected by I don't know how many publishers and agents. It went on to win the Great Author honor, but when I was first trying to publish it, like this kept getting rejected again and again. People were like, "There's way too much Spanish in this book." It wasn't even that much Spanish. I mean, to me, like it was a normal amount of Spanish that would be usually in dialogue that people were having. And I had a glossary at the back with all those words translated into English, and still was too much. A lack of white characters. That was the other thing that people told me about The Smoking Mirror. Like, couldn't you include like a white sidekick so that they would have to explain stuff to him and like it would become clearer to non-Latinx readers? I'm like, did Tolkien, you guys know The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings and all stuff like that. Can you imagine if the author Tolkien was like, I need to have a modern European go back in time to the Third Age so that the hobbits can explain to him all, no. But when we're talking about Latino culture, yes, we need an explanation. Cultural inaccessibility, this is just students inaccessible. How are we gonna market it? I don't know why. And then the other one is, when it doesn't fit the stereotypes of your culture. Joy put it very, very lovely a little while ago. There are as many ways of being Mexican American as there are Mexican Americans, right? As I talk about these things, some of you are like nodding like you're going, what is he talking about? I mean, even that didn't happen in my family. Because everybody's family is different. Every single person's identity is different. But publishing wants, what they wanted, it's not so much right now, but what they wanted for the longest time was Mexican stories to be about migrants who are suffering, and then, then some like really sweet old like teacher helps the kid to come to grips with it. That's what they want. They want martyrs who are lifted up by good Samaritans. And that's bullshit, I'm sorry. Stop that nonsense now. And so the main problem is there's a lack of diversity in the publishing industry. It's overwhelmingly white, cis female, heterosexual, non-disabled. They just don't have the perspective to be able to select texts. Now there's been a lot of work done to try to diversify the publishing industry. It's getting better, but we're still a long way off. All right. Let's take a moment then to kind of decompress. I want you, just with somebody who's near you, can you talk about the representation you saw in school when you were a student? And both Joy and Stephanie talked about how a lot of us grew up without that kind of representation. Now, Stephanie didn't even, all the way through her doctorate, she had hardly had any kind of connection with like Latino representation. I know that when I was in elementary, the only book that we read that could be remotely even considered a representation, and this is really depressing, was Ferdinand the Bull, because it like took place in Spain and it had like people with Spanish names. That is really depressing. Unfortunately, I was in McAllen. I know that like there were some other places, like La Jolla and maybe El Cacho. There were a couple places where there were already in, what was this, 1978 or something like that would have been, 77, 78. There are places where Mexican American studies were already beginning to like emerge, but not in McAllen ISD when I was there, not at Ben Milam Elementary. So, and then I went through middle school with no exposure. High school, we read Latin American authors in translation, but beyond that, it wasn't until I got to college at Pan American University that I read San Jacinto's House of Mango Street in a world literature class, which is a U.S. Latina, right? That I was suddenly like, oh wow, Mexican Americans write books that are taught at the university. I had no idea. I didn't know that we had to like subtract our identity. I know we didn't have to hide and strip away who we are in order to be accepted in academia. So that's what I would like you to do. Just reflect with each other. Just share. You may have nothing to share. You may just listen. But share with a couple other people, one or two other people, what your experience was being in school, seeing yourself reflected in either the books or the curriculum, if that happened at all. Let's take about 5 minutes, just as a nice decompress. It's also a good time to go to the restroom if you need to. What I want to do in the next hour and a half is to talk about two different ways that we can integrate in specific, meaningful ways the culture and experiences of our students and of ourselves in the social studies classroom. The first way I think is like relatively easy, but to do it in a way that's substantial, we need not just to do the celebrations themselves, but to have like literature behind it and to explore the meaning of these things in a literary way, which works really well if you're in a school. I mean, like, when I was a secondary social studies director at Don ISD and working with elementary social studies director, I had to get after her all the time because second semester would come and there would be no social studies being taught. I'm like, we're legally obligated, statutorily obligated to teach social studies every week. You can't like not teach it. Just get to say, no, it's okay, I'm not gonna teach it, because it's like in the Texas Administrative Code, you like literally have to. So I tried to always like preach that message, and when I became the bilingual director, I made many principals upset with me by like getting on their case all the time about this, but it is true. And if you do it primarily through reading, then you need to have reading that is, rich in historical and cultural kinds of things. So let's talk about holidays, and not just the bright red, white, and blue ones, mind you, okay? Let's first take a look at the TEKS at the elementary level for social studies. So in kinder, we have explain the reasons for national and patriotic holidays, identify customs associated with national patriotic holidays, describe and explain the importance of family customs and traditions, and compare family customs and traditions. And all of these together serve as the perfect justification, statutory justification for bringing in things that have to do about the specific días festivos, celebraciones que tenemos en nuestras familias, en nuestra comunidad. For first grade, you have described the origins of customs, holidays, and celebrations of the community, state, and nation. Right there, customs of the community, that's your way in, right there. Compare the observance of holidays and celebrations, past and present. This right here, past. The observance of holidays in the past is your way in also to thinking about how things were celebrated in Mexico, or how they were even celebrated in pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. How was the solstice celebrated as the birth of Huitzilopochtli, the chief god of the Aztecs, who's also god of the sun. They believed that he was born during the winter solstice. So that kind of stuff, you can pull all these really rich, interesting things in. For second grade, explain the significance of various community, state, and national celebrations, identify the significance of various ethnic and our cultural celebrations. Ahí está. La justificación que buscaban, ahí está. Compare ethnic or cultural celebrations. So when you say compare, and all of this is ostensibly within the US, but it's also throughout the world as well, right? Which allows us to do an exploration of Latin American. Right? The kid from Guatemala in your classroom, and the kid from Michoacan, and the kid from the Rio Grande Valley. We could talk about the way we all celebrate, the Christmas holidays. Who does Dia de los Reyes? Who does Navidad? What things happen? What's going on in your family? Is there a tamalada? There's so many things that you could talk about and explore the origins of, and use in this rich way to center their identity. Third grade, you have identified the significance of various ethnic and or cultural celebrations. Compare ethnic or cultural celebrations. Which is essentially this. By the way, all this wording, you've looked at the 2021 TEKS, right? They are almost word for word the same. The numbering changes, but these specific TEKS are going to be in the new TEKS as well. For fourth grade, identify custom celebrations and traditions of various cultural, regional, and local groups in Texas. That includes Mexican Americans, because we are obviously the prime ethnic group in the state. Describe the origin and significance of national celebrations, describe customs and traditions of various racial, ethnic, and religious groups in the U.S. All of this is justification for talking, frankly, about whatever you want in terms of cultural celebrations and going deep into them. They are important TEKS that students need to be mastering through the type of exploration that I'm going to suggest to you. So, one way in, and one thing that I'm going to provide you, I've already uploaded a sampler for it, but I'm trying to see, I know somewhere I have the PDF of the entire thing. There is this great anthology called the Poetry Friday Anthology for Celebrations, which was edited by Janet Long and Sylvia Bardell. It is a bilingual collection of poems, authentic poems written by actual poets, not like commissioned or whatever, about different celebrations. And there's literally one for every Friday in the year, because there's something happening nearly every single week, and we don't always we're not always aware of this, but there's so much stuff going on. So many of these things are specific to Latinx lives and traditions, so bringing them in is really, really awesome. There are all additional poems about other cultural celebrations that are kind of tangentially tied into something. And there's even this audio sampler with readings in both English and in Spanish, and I'm gonna make reference to it and let you hear some of the poems from it and show you what it's like. So let me give you a quick. So this is like the sampler that I uploaded, and you can see that one of the poems here is Three Kings Day by Carmen Bernier Gran, a great Latina writer. And what we did was, they reached out to me and they said, can you, David, create like a sampler where these poems are being read in an English and Spanish version, and they hired me to do it. And so I got students that were taking a graduate course with me, and I also did some of them, and we recorded them in English and in Spanish, and then I set them, I put music in them. I am a musician on top of everything else. Because you got to do something to like not go insane with all the other pressures. So let me show you some of these really quickly. So let's listen to Three Kings Day.
Three Kings Day by Carmen T. Bernier Grant. We hear the story. 3 wise kings from the east went to visit Jesus and left him 3 gifts. We fill up shoeboxes with grass, fill up bowls with water, for the 3 kings' camels to eat and to drink. Shoeboxes and bowls under beds, we try to peep but fall asleep until kings and camels have come and gone. Trails of grass on the floor, the water's gone too. Inside of each shoebox, 3 gifts from 3 wise kings. Tres Reyes Magos por Carmen T. Bernier Grant. Escuchamos el cuento. 3 Reyes Magos del Oriente fueron a ver al niño Jesús y le dejaron 3 regalos. Llenamos de hierba las cajas de zapatos, llenamos de agua platos hondos, para que los camellos de los santos reyes tengan algo de comer y beber. Cajas y platos bajo las camas, queremos espiar, pero nos quedamos dormidos, hasta que los reyes y sus camellos han venido y se han ido. Hay rastros de hierba por todo el piso, los platos están secos. En cada caja encontramos 3 regalos que nos han dejado los 3 Reyes Magos.
And so, I mean, it's just a nice thing so that you can get kids talking about the tradition. Some kids in your classroom will not do this. Some will not be Catholic, some will be Catholic, but have grown up in maybe in the valley in like the Mexican American culture where it's more about Christmas and not about that particular day. And even on that day, people have different ways of celebrating and receiving the presents and stuff like that. So it's a great way to open this conversation up and do a comparative discussion of traditions around that holiday. Let me show you another interesting one. What did I want to? I should have shown you this. There are all kinds of poems that I think from the sampler that could be useful, like International Mother Language Day, which celebrates being bilingual. And I think that's such a beautiful thing to celebrate being bilingual. National Pop Music.
Bilingual by Alma Flor Alba. Because I speak Spanish, I can listen to my grandmother's stories and say, familia, madre, amor. Because I speak English, I can learn from my teacher and say, I love school. Because I am bilingual, I can read libros and books. I have amigos and friends, enjoy canciones and songs, juegos and games, and have twice as much fun. And someday, because I speak 2 languages, I will be able to do twice as much to help twice as many people and be twice as good in what I do. Bilingüe por Alma Flor Hada. Porque hablo español, puedo escuchar los cuentos de abuelita y decir familia, madre, amor. Porque hablo inglés, puedo aprender de mi maestra y decir I love school. Porque soy bilingüe, puedo leer libros y books. Tengo amigos y friends. Disfruto canciones y songs, juegos y games. Y me divierto el doble. Y algún día, porque hablo 2 idiomas, podré hacer doble esfuerzo para ayudar al doble de personas. Y lo haré todo el doble de bien.
Which is a really nice sentiment, right? Yeah. Stop. So the music is like all bright and upbeat, stuff like that. So again, there's so much stuff that can be used here. There are just things that we don't even think about that we can tie in to our experience, like International Children's Book Day. It's something that people often don't think about. There is, what is it called? El Día de los Niños, Día de los Libros, right? This is a super important celebration in April that we do. Pat Mora wrote this beautiful poem that is like interactive. It has, let's clap, and it has kids clap, say dia, day, every day. And so you get kids to actually do these things. And for like younger kids, it really, really makes a lot of sense. So there's this extent to which poetry, especially like I said, in lower grades, can do a lot to center their identity. You'll see that there's also a poem about Day of the Dead and a poem about National Cocoa Day, which is just like I don't know why we're not celebrating this. Why is this not like a friggin' holiday, right? ¿Y por qué hago énfasis en esto? ¿De dónde viene el cacao? De México. And I think that's something that kids don't always appreciate. Like, chocolate is one of the most beloved things on the planet. Like, it's hard to imagine our existence without chocolate, right? And it's Mexican, 100%. Cacao es 100% mexicano. In talking to them about how the Maya and the Nahuatl, the Aztecas, would make chocolate, but without sugar. How they would use, like, they would either drink it with like chile, or they would, if they wanted it sweet for like kids, they would mix it with honey. And it wasn't until Europeans came to, I just realized I like cut my ear when I was shaving. At least it didn't like just bleed all down my neck. That wasn't like I walked in, you guys like, what the hell is wrong with you? It wasn't until the Europeans came and they took cacao to Europe that it began to be blended with milk and sugar and become what we have today, the chocolate we have today. Just a really interesting mestizaje. And you talk to them about their identities and how they're mestizos, how they're a blend, and how blends can like take two incredible things: sugar, hello, right? And milk, I guess 3 things, and milk, and then cacao, and like blend them together into something beautiful that everybody loves. I think self-love is so important. People are always down on the border specifically, right? Just talking smack about the border and how horrible our lives are supposed to be, and how we're like, man, this is a great place to live. I love living here. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. I wouldn't want to have grown up any other place than this. Okay, so those are some ideas. I also want to talk to you about my book they call me Güero, that I'm giving you like a free PDF of so that you can like use any of the poems you want from it. And it's got like this little medal. Like I won like multiple things, and they tried like figuring out places to put the medals, but they're like, let's just put the most like important one, and then they just like listed all the rest of them. In this book, you have a boy, a 12-year-old boy, who is only known as Güero in the book, because that's what everybody calls him, and so it's kind of like just the thing. I remember when I was a kid, it's kind of, that part is based on the way it was for me when I was a kid, that if somebody said, David, does 9 pay attention? David, I wouldn't pay attention, I'd be like, Güero, and I go, what, yes? Like when I was 3 or 4, like I didn't know that my name. nobody actually called me that. And one of the things that I loved doing in this book was, I mean, it's about this boy discovering poetry and using poetry to kind of explore his own identity, celebrate his community and his family, and also to push back against bullies and stuff like that. But one of the things that I loved doing was creating poems that are about certain celebrations. So there's the birthday medley that I want to read to you in a second. There's Bottle Rocket Battle, which is about the 4th of July. You might not want to use that for younger kids because it's about like kids shooting bottle rockets at each other. But it's really funny. It's really funny, and like there's like a lesson to be learned about like why you should not be shooting bottle rockets at each other. There's the Tamalada, and then there's a series of haiku called Food for Each Season. There's the Cascaron War, Carne Asada, Father's Day, and Teresa's Quinceañera Waltz. And these are all about celebrations that I think are super crucial to our experience. Now, the book's not out in Spanish yet, but like almost all of these have a lot of Spanish in them. So I'm gonna show you a couple things just really quickly so you can get a feel for like other types of literature that you could use in the classroom. I guess I'm gonna do birthday medley. Maybe it comes later. Here it is, okay. Let me change the view so I can see it. Cool. So, and this is a great like participatory poem that you can get kids to participate in. My brother turned 7 today. Come listen to the joyful sounds. Dale, 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 no pierdas el tino, porque si lo pierdes, boom, the piñata explodes. The pingos flock for the candy like crows, bolsitas for those who move too slow. That was always me. All the kids were like, John, I'd be like, oh, but they're gonna give bolsitas out, so no. All the kids attacking each other, and I'm like, I'm waiting for the bolsitas. I'll be the first in line. Estas son las mañanitas que cantaba el rey David. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday Arturito, that's his brother's name. Make a wish then blow. Mordida, mordida, mordida. Don't wipe the icing from your chin till I snap a photo. Come on, grin. Give me a hug, carnalito. Open my present, primerito. So, when you get, I've done a lot of school visits, and when I go to schools where there are no Latino kids, they're just reading it, and they're like, and they get to all the Spanish, and they're just, all it takes is there for to be like 1 or 2 Latino kids in there, and they're like all singing the songs, and all the other kids are like, oh snap! I wish I knew those songs, and it's a lovely experience. Like just being able to celebrate these wonderful things that we do, and then to talk to them. Well, why mordida, mordida? And you explain to them, no, because the person like leans their head down until they take a bite, and then you have to push their face into the cake. And people from other cultures are like, really? And they let you? Well, no, that's just part of the fun. They don't want to have their face covered with cake. And like, and there's always a sneaky one who gets around doing it, right? And then what you do later on is you like let them get away with it, and then you cut the piece of cake for them, and you come up and you're like, oh, here's your cake, and they're like, oh, thank you, and you in their face, and you're like, hubieras mordido. Como quiera te llenaste de pastel. I'll show you one more, the Cascaron War, which is. Did you guys have Cascaron Wars when you were kids? I call them wars because in my family they were wars. There was we were not nice to each other about the Cascarones. Here's the I would read Tamalati, but it's really long, but it's a lot of fun. Güero ends up, like his sister is like, she's into sports and she wants to watch a football game, so he takes her place in the tamalada, and so he gets to hear like what women are talking about in the kitchen. He's always been curious about it. It's a lot of fun. Oh, here's really quickly, food for each season. San Marcos blanket. Only the sound of bacon can make me emerge. People who are not Mexican are Mexican American, they're like, San Marcos blanket, what are you talking about? You don't know what life is until you've curled under a San Marcos blanket to keep warm, right?
All year round.
All year round.
Because they're easy.
You turn the AC up. Así somos, ¿no? Turn the AC up and get on a San Marcos blanket. Just so you feel. My wife, like, está 100 grados afuera. Sí, pero soy bien friolenta.
Take us on Marcos blanket.
Sipping atole, folks search their piece of rosca for baby Jesus. Hazy spring morning, stopping for breakfast tacos on the way to school. South Padre Island, teeming with college students, the warm Gulf with shrimp. Fragrant white flowers on a sea of glossy green, ruby red grapefruit. The smell of pizza in the hallways of my school. Summer's almost here. Cold and juicy red, the watermelon awaits its chile destiny. White hot, pitiless, the sun bakes the earth bone dry. Where's the raspa man? You need that. You need the hombre de raspas. It's super important in our society. And I mean, I just think it's beautiful for kids to see stuff like that written about. They're like, oh my God, you have a poem about that raspa man? Yeah, it's important. Oh, here it is. Okay. After Easter Mass, we head to Tia Vero's house to hunt for bright eggs amid blooming citrus trees. Half acre dotted with specks of vibrant color, huercos rush with joy, baskets swinging in their hands. Yeah, huercos. If you find it offensive, I apologize, but it's calm. Some eggs are plastic, stuffed with candy, jangling coins. I want the others, those cascarones. These are the true prizes, hollowed out, confetti-filled, or heavy with flour, sealed with tape and loud pastels. Cousins jostle me, competing for this ammo, these small, gaudy bombs we collect in plastic bags. Even young uncles snatch a few from little kids, and the war is on, like mock combats in ancient times. Teresa gets me, smashes the shell on my head, rainbow dandruff falls, but I don't chase her. Patience. Instead, I lob eggs at Joseph and Alvaro, duck down so pingos like Arturo can reach me. I crack a pink shell in the air over Mom's hair, would never hit her, and let vivid fragments fall. The yard's a riot of squeals and screams and laughter. Little bits of construction paper drift among the flowers. I see my sister. Time for payback. I stalk her like a hunter, keeping out of sight, circling behind the grapefruit trees. I heft the flower-packed cascaron, sneaking up behind her, then crash against her cranium. Dust her ghost white in revenge. So, take a moment there at your table to round robin. Say 3 or 4 of you together, round robin, go one at a time, and talk about ideas for like what other holidays or traditions from your and your students' culture that could be celebrated with poems or picture books like that. Share out a little bit. What are some of your ideas for things? And maybe you've done stuff like this before that you might want to share with people. We didn't know, and I was like, yeah, I know, and that's on me. It was a really hard thing to realize that I had climbed up into the ivory tower of academia, and I had put myself above them, and I had forgotten where I came from. Because this is what had been done to me. It had been erased, systematically erased as part of me. And I had to learn not to do it to my kids. It's the hardest thing in the world, to learn to undo the damage that's been done to you so you don't pass it on to other people. Right? That's why I think it's so important. It's a way in for getting kids excited about talking about culture and talking about history, starting with legends. It really works. Because those kids were on fire the rest of the year. By the end of the year, they had gone and done this ethnographic work that I'm talking about. They had gone and sat down with an elder of their family and had some of them tell them a story. Mostly they were scary stories, but sometimes it was just some kind of historical story. And they had written the stories down in their own, they had written those stories down in their own words in this contextualization kind of process that I taught them, where they gave characters names and dialogue and did all this kind of like literary work around the core of the story that had been told by one of their relatives. the same wording as second grade, just the 15A and B, they're even the same numbers, and then 18B is the same as the second grade 19B. In fourth grade, you get identify customs, celebrations, and traditions of various cultural, regional, and local groups in Texas, including Mexican American, right? Explain how examples of art, this is fifth, music, and literature reflect the times during which they were created, which gives you an in to talking about like literature and storytelling from as far back as you want to go, as long as there's some kind of connection to an ethnic group in the U.S., like Mexican Americans. Describe customs and traditions of various racial, ethnic, and religious groups in the United States. So all that stuff, I think, opens the door. I have a book that is not written for elementary age kids, so I didn't even bother bringing it in. It's good. It's called Flower. That's another song. Another book of mine. It's called Feathered Serpent, Dark Heart of Sky, Myths of Mexico. Came out last year in April, and won a couple awards as well. I had two major books last year. That one and They Call Me Bueno. And what it took me like 6 years to put it together. It is it's partially retranslation, adaptation, retelling of pre-Columbian Mexican myths mainly from Aztec and Maya sources, but also from Purépecha, which is in Michoacán, the Tarahumara from the north, Zapoteca from the Oaxaca area, and kind of woven together to tell like the epic story of Mexico's mythological history from creation all the way to conquest. One of the things that really pushed me to do this was just the realization when I was doing my bachelor's at Pan American University, halfway through became the University of Texas Pan American, that something had been taken from my family, not just from me, but from my family, because my grandfather Garza and his great-grandparents who came from Mier and Guerrero and Tamaulipas, they didn't know these stories either. Like it had been erased centuries before I was born, the myths of the indigenous people of Mexico, right? Now, those of you who went to school in Mexico can probably can confirm this is true. Now, you do get taught some of that mythology in Mexico when you're in school, but there was a time when it was suppressed during the late colonial period and the early years of Mexico's history, like the late 1700s, early 1800s. All that stuff was suppressed. And so this is something that I write in the introduction to the collection, which is really like a YA collection. And I'm going to talk about something that I'm doing for younger kids that draws from it. Even though the stories my grandparents, aunts, and uncles told me when I was a child were thick with local lore, strange boogeymen, and wailing women, no trace remained of the old gods, ancient priests, the vaunted heroes of Mexico's pre-Columbian past. In school, I was taught, like my father, the myths of the Norse, the Egyptians, the Romans, especially the Greeks. I devoured the Odyssey, hungry for those Bronze Age sensibilities, that interweaving of human and divine. On my own, I read other great epics of Western mythology, the Iliad, the Aeneid. I widened my net, plunged into India and its Ramayana, sought out the Sunjata of West Africa. But it wasn't until I took a world literature class in college that I read a single Aztec or Mayan myth. Can you imagine? To be a Mexican American in Texas at a school that's just a few miles from Mexico and never, ever, ever be introduced to teaching. Do you know how many indigenous nations existed in Mexico at the time of the conquest? About 60. Each with its own rich heritage. And in Mexico, even though a lot of stuff was kind of destroyed during the conquest, it was better preserved than what happened in North America, in the rest of North America, with the North American indigenous people. So this stuff is there. It can be taught, but it's not. I did the school just miles from the Mexican border, but now one of my teachers spoke of that Quetzalcoatl, or Itzan, of Cihuacoatl, or Ixchel. My family knew nothing of these Mesoamerican gods. Something important had been kept from me and other Mexican American students. At first I was shocked and a bit angry, yet who could I blame for 5 centuries of syncretism and erasure? Rather than lash out in response to the loss I felt, I began to scour the local libraries, every book I could find about pre-Columbian Mexican myths. In the end, I realized it was my responsibility, knowing of this lack of my part, to reconnect with the patriarch. That duty to the history of one people has never been better expressed than one of the few remaining poems of the Maya. There are only 15 poems, guys, by the Maya from pre-Columbian times that exist in the present. Only 15. We've got other works by them, some codices, things that are carved into stone, usually have to do with kings, and so forth. Poetry, we just have the 15 poems of the colonial era manuscript, the Songs of Zimbabwe. And I've translated some. I translated all 15 of them in my book, For the Serpent Our Heart's Guide. They're written in Mayan Yucateco. Yucateco is actually Mayan language. Here's the poem, and I think that the poem has resonance for us today if you think about it, you know, how that perspective translates to the Mesoamerican perspective. It's vital we never lose count of how many long generations passed faraway age when here in this land, those great and powerful men who lifted the walls of those cities, the ancient, awesome ruins, pyramids rising like hills. We try to determine their meaning here in our humbler towns, a meaning that matters today, one we draw from the signs those men of the Golden Age, men of this land, our forefathers, urged us to seek in the sky. Consecrated to this task, we turn our faces upward as darkness slowly falls from zenith to horizon and fills the sky with stars in which we scribe our fate, in which we can search for our fate. This is a poem from like a small town in the Yucatan Peninsula, Zimbabwe, that preserved those poems and wrote them down as soon as they had like the writing system of the Spanish. They were poems that had existed for centuries before the Spanish arrived. That encourages us to look into the past, because you only know who you are if you know where you come from, if you know who your ancestors were. Like, you can't grapple with it completely. And a lot of us are really familiar with who our Spanish ancestors were, and the Spanish traditions, Catholicism, the Spanish language, you know, the kind of music and so forth that they brought to Mexico. But we're very, very ignorant to this day of our indigenous ancestry. Some of us have more than others. My wife is 60% indigenous, I am 10. So it's like, no real comparison. Our children are, 35% indigenous, whatever. We don't know what indigenous group we came from because all that's been erased. All we can do is try to honor it and understand it a little more. And I think that it helps. It helps to anchor you to something more than just your Spanish Catholic background. Because you're more than that, because you are a mestizas, all of you sitting in front of you, mestizas. Some of us more than others, but everybody's got a little bit of indigenous blood. And your students do as well. Here are some great places to start, I think, in dealing with Mesoamerican men. Does anybody know who Duncan Tonatiuh is? Yeah? He is a great picture book writer. Wonderful guy. He, like me, is also he's actually half Mexican. And his dad is Anglican. And he does beautiful, and his artwork. One of the things that's really arresting about his work is his artwork is like the codices, the pre-Columbian codices. And he's got this great book called La Princesa y el Guerrero that I super recommend that you guys use. This in English is The Princess and the Warrior, right? There's an English version and a Spanish version. And this tells the story of the origin of the two major volcanoes that are right outside of Mexico City, right on the edge of Veracruz and the state of Mexico, which are, you guys know, names of them? Who knows the names of these? Yes, Popocatépetl, right? And Iztaccíhuatl. That's awesome. Yes, these two men. One of them is dormant, one of them is active. Popocatépetl is the one that's like ridiculously active, right? Don Goya, they call it. He's like spews like flames and fire out of him. And Iztaccíhuatl, the lower one that's right next to him, is dormant. Now, Iztaccíhuatl literally means white woman, because it looks like a woman who's just covered in a white blanket of snow. And the origin is that there, in the time of either the Toltecs or the Aztecs, depending on what version you read, there was a warrior who was put in charge of the armies of a particular king. And he went off to fight the enemy they had. And the king told him, if you are triumphant, if you defeat our enemies, when you come back, you will have my daughter's hand in marriage. You will marry the princess. This warrior and the princess were already secretly in love. Maybe the dad. Dad's usually know. So maybe the dad's like, yeah, I know that they're kind of like seeing each other, on the sly, and give them a chance to like actually get married to her. But there was a jealous warrior who wanted wanted to get married to the princess, and as the war was winding down and they were about to win, that jealous warrior returned first before the rest of the army with a group of loyal warriors and lied to the king and said that Obokatzin, which is what he was called at the time, had died in battle, and so and he had to take over and like lead the forces to victory. So everything was prepared for the princess to get married to him. She died of a broken heart. Now that's the child-friendly version. There are other versions that say she deliberately committed suicide, so that she did not have to marry this guy that she didn't love. But in any event, she dies. And Obokatzin comes and finds her dead. And he like loses his mind. And he takes her in his arms and he climbs up to the mountains to demand of the gods that they bring her back to life. And he waits and waits and waits. And the gods are like, well, dude, we're not gonna bring her back to life. Well, we'll keep you guys together for all eternity. We're gonna turn you both into volcanoes. And so he becomes Obokatet, which, from time to time is overwhelmed by grief that he begins to cry tears of lava, moan, all that kind of stuff. And his beloved, he's not so loved, eternally asleep by his side. It's a really beautiful story, and he does a really good job of making it kid-friendly and accessible. Here's another really famous legend or myth from Mexico is the story of the dwarf king of Uxmal, Rey Enano de Uxmal. About 1,000 years ago, they were at the very waning end of the great Mayan civilizations. There was this a city arose on the Yucatan Peninsula called Uxmal, and you can see the ruins. It's some beautiful ruins. It's got one of the most amazing pyramids in Mexico. It's like a round pyramid, kind of like a cone, like an ice cream cone, like put upside down, whatever. It's rounded, and it's really unique and cool. And it's called, they call it the Pyramid of the Wizard, or the Pyramid of the Dwarf. And the story goes that there was a witch who lived in the nearby town of Cabá. And she was lonely, didn't have any children or anybody to be with. And one day the Alushas, which are these like little elvish creatures, left an egg for her on the road as she was wandering around. And she took the egg home, and it eventually hatched. And out of it came this like little boy, about 6 inches tall, who could talk. And he's like, "Hey, who are you?" And she's like, "I'm your grandmother." And so she raises him, but he stops growing when he's like kind of short, and she realizes that he must be like a magical being, like half Alusha. She had, a long time ago, when she was like starting out as a witch, she had been given by the Alushas a little drum and a little stick to strike the drum with, and they told her never. Put it away, hide it, keep it safe for us. One day, the rightful king of Uxmal is going to sound that drum, announcing to the world that he has arrived. And so this little boy that she raises, he's basically a teenager now, but he still looks like a little kid. He finds the drum, sounds the drum, and it like makes this horrendous noise. And the king of Uxmal at the time, who's like this tyrant, who's making everybody's life miserable, has heard a prophecy that when a drum sounds so loud it can be heard all across the kingdom, that his time has come to an end. And he sends the soldiers out, they find the source of it, which is this witch's house. They take the witch and the boy before the king, and the king's like, "I'm not just going to give him my throne. I'm going to submit you to some contest." And the dwarf king is like, the dwarf is like, "Yeah, I know, that's what the prophecy says." And so he puts him through these 3 tests, which are really like ways the king's just trying to like get rid of him, but he wins all 3 tests, and he becomes the king. And it's a really lovely story. A great version of it was published in Mexico by Luis Suarez Vallejo, and it's in my book, the Feather Serpent Dark Arm Sky, and we are making a graphic novel adaptation of it for younger readers, and I'll show you some images of it. It's coming out next year. So that's a great story, and there are like multiple versions. In fact, you can find versions online that you can use. It's really great. You can find it in Spanish online if you just search for El Rey Enano de Uxmal. A couple of other things that I've given you. I've given you a copy of this book, Leyendas del Agua en Mexico. Let me see, I'll show it to you quick. It'll be on the PDF. It'll be on the pen drive that they give you in PDF form. And it's really cool. these like really cool stories. It gives you all these leyendas prehispánicas sobre como Navidad, cuarto sol, sol de agua, que habla de sol, como el mundo fue destruido por una inundación muy grande, como los dioses salvan a un hombre y una mujer, así muy similar al cuento bíblico. Y luego este hermoso cuento de Hapunda, que es una leyenda o mito de Michoacán, de la gente purépecha. And it's kind of like a version, like a Swan Lakey kind of thing, about this princess, this purépecha princess, who falls in love with Lake Pascua. She falls in love with the lake. It's kind of weird. It's a myth, right? But the lake loves her back. And so there's the kingdom. She's like a princess. The kingdom gets invaded by Mexica, by Aztecs, and the lake protects her because they take her captive or whatever. And the lake tells her, just jump into me. And she's like, but I'll drown. And he's like, no, I'll take care of you. And he transforms her into a beautiful white crane. And so the idea is like to this day, like if you're in Michoacán and you go to like Pátzcuaro, you'll see there's tons of white cranes all over, and they're just like, like their descendants, like they're together forever. As long as there are white cranes in this area, the Princess Hapunda is still with us. So lots of really beautiful stories like that from before the time of the conquest. And again, this book is all about water, which is really cool. Like we live by a river, like water is on our mind all the time. And this, like for example, this one tells the story of Tlalocan, which is el paraíso de Tlaloc, el dios de la lluvia, right? And explains how it is. It gives you images from the codices and stuff like that. It's a really awesome retelling of the myth. En español, bien accesible para los jóvenes, para los niños. Luego hay cuentos, leyendas coloniales también. Ajá. Y también leyendas modernas con ayuda. Y es la versión hidalguense que escribió Andrés González Pajes, que es el editor de este libro. Bastantes cosas muy padres, muy bonitas, que ves que se nos han robado. O sea, algunos son un poco más coloniales, ¿no? Este lago también tiene un origen muy interesante. Puras leyendas y mitos de aves. Es algo lindo que nos estoy dando. También les recomiendo mucho que no tengo una copia que les puede dar, pero este libro, Mitología Mexicana para Niños, de Gabriela Santana, también es muy bien hecho. Bonitas ilustraciones y versiones muy accesibles de los cuentos. Ahora, este verano estoy traduciendo al inglés este libro, el Diccionario de Mitos de América, de María García Esperón. Y obviamente lo estoy traduciendo porque es un libro enormemente padre que se va a publicar aquí en Estados Unidos. El mismo editor que trajo los libros de Harry Potter, his name is Arthur Levine. For a long time he was with Scholastic. He had his own line, Arthur Levine books from Scholastic that published all Harry Potter books. He's broken away and he's created his own publishing house. And one of the things that he wants to do is do a lot more like multicultural things. So most of the people that he's lined up for his launch next year are people of color or people from marginalized communities, whatever. And he acquired this book that was published, I guess, 3 years ago, and like won a bunch of awards. It's super cool. And now I'm translating it into English, and I'm also helping them to like maybe to tweak the Spanish version a little bit to make it a little more palatable for a U.S. audience. Because what it does is it gathers together sacred tales, mainly from South America and Mesoamerica, like the area of Mexico and Central America, but also from North America. And one of the things that you have to be careful about when you're publishing a book that includes sacred stories of Native people that live in the U.S. or in Canada is there are things that they expect to see if you're going to be writing stories that are from their culture, because of course they still exist, right? That's one of the things that we have to get across to our students. Los indios no murieron, siguen existiendo, hay gente indígena viviendo, hay naciones y tribus ahorita mismo, con miles y millones de personas. Hay casi 5 millones de mayas viviendo en el sur de México y Guatemala. Los mayas no desaparecieron todas de la tierra como algunos creen. Están 5 millones de mayas. I think that they would have realized as they disappeared. They're still here with us, right? And the same thing, there's Cherokee Nation, there's the Nambe Pueblo, there's the Hopi, they all still exist. They all live and have lives, and we have to respect them and talk about them in the present tense and not talk about the Indians did this, the Indians were no. Ancestors of the Indians that live today did those things. It's really important to keep that in mind. So, in working on this book, one of the things I want to do is just tweak the Spanish version that will be distributed in the U.S. so that it is respectful of that. And in fact, the title is not going to be Dictionary of Myths of America, which would be kind of a horrible title in English. It works fine in Spanish, it doesn't work in English. It's going to be called The Sea-Ringed World, which is what the Aztecs called the Americas. They called it the Sea-Ringed World. It's the Sea-Ringed World, Sacred Tales of the Americas. It's coming out next year. But I've given you a copy of it because it's got some great versions of like super essential stories from the Aztec and the Maya. I'm going to share like just a couple with you really quickly. Maybe not even like read the whole thing, but I just want you to see what it's like. Okay? It's got some really cool illustrations. And I'm giving you guys a PDF just so you'll have it. It's all in Spanish. Really cool kid-friendly things. She called it a dictionary. One of the reasons we can't call it a dictionary is because when I translate it into English, it will not be in alphabetical order anymore because the titles will change, right? So like Abuela Araña, Grandmother Spider, that doesn't go like in alphabetical order anymore. It's already. So Aztlán. You guys are familiar with that, with the term Aztlán, right? ¿Qué era Aztlán? ¿Qué se supone que era?
Es el lugar de donde vinieron los aztecas.
Los aztecas, de donde salieron los mexicas, los toltecas, todos estos grupos que hablaban que ahora decimos, los llamamos aztecas. Ellos mismos nunca se decían aztecas. Los aztecas literalmente quiere decir, residente de Aztlán. Una vez que salieron de Aztlán, ya no eran aztecas, así lo vieron ustedes de ellos. Es como, imagínense, si regresamos el tiempo a como 1800 y le preguntáramos a un estadounidense, ¿Are you English? No, I'm not English. I was English, or my parents were English, but I'm American, I'm a U.S. citizen. Y así lo mismo, a los mexicanos. No se les hubiera ocurrido para nada llamarse azteca. Los aztecas eran los que vivían en Atlántico, en su imaginación, en su leyenda. Entonces, me gusta porque cada mito empieza con un pequeño poema. Las garzas blancas como la sal, el agua clara del manantial, cielos azules, isla de paz, como quisiera volver a Aztlán. Era una isla de blancura resplandeciente, rodeada por aguas del color de las turquesas. La frecuentaban las garzas de plumaje blanquísimo y el sol se elevaba en su horizonte como un pájaro de fuego. Llovían esmeraldas cuando el príncipe poeta entonaba sus cantos, que eran también flores, y el viaje de los astros en la noche era registrado por los sabios en libros escritos con tinta roja y negra. Se llamaba Aztlán, lugar de blancura, según algunos, isla de las garzas, según otros. Parecía eterna y quizá lo era, pues en sus pulimentadas calzadas posaban los dioses sus sandalias de oro. Sobre sus aguas plácidas surcaban barcas cargadas de flores y productos de la tierra, el maíz dorado y las dulces calabazas, el cacao para preparar la bebida sagrada y los chiles de variados colores. El aire purísimo y el cielo azul, templado el ambiente, equilibrio de norte a sur, serenidad de este a oeste. Aztlán de los ponientes de esplendor rojizo y de la noche verdinegra, de la aurora dormida en las ramas de los árboles y de las 400 voces del sinsonte. Parecía eterna, quizá lo era, cuando el dios Huitzilopochtli, el azul colibrí de la izquierda, guerrero solar e incansable, se apareció en majestad ante Mexicli, que era un altivo príncipe y un sacerdote piadoso, mientras éste hacía sacrificios en el templo, punzándose los muslos con espinas de maguey para ofrecer sangre preciosa. Mexicli, mi espejo, dijo Huitzilopochtli, es menester que dirijas al pueblo a otro destino. No hay tiempo que perder. Sopla el caracol de los 4 rumbos, deja oír su voz. Los creadores en el cielo han decretado el final de Aztlán y debes empezar a dibujar otro principio. Mucho se afligió Mexicli al escuchar la orden de Huitzilopochtli. Pensamientos encontrados agitaban su ánimo. Aztlán desaparecería. ¿Se hundiría la isla blanca en las aguas de turquesa? No osó preguntarle a Dios, pero el azul colibrí podía leer la mente del caudillo y frunció las cejas. Aztlán ni se hundirá ni desaparecerá, porque es eterna. Pero dentro de poco nadie podrá verla. Ha cumplido su cometido, el fin para el que la forjaron los creadores. Ahora, escúchame, Mexicli, espejo mío, y dime, ¿me obedecerás? El príncipe cayó de rodillas y puso la frente en el suelo ante la majestad de Huitzilopochtli. El dios sonrió, satisfecho al contemplar desde sus adentros el valiente corazón de Mexicli. Llevarás al pueblo en peregrinación por un largo tiempo. Caminarán hacia el sur y en el camino las mujeres alumbrarán a las criaturas de un mundo que será nuevo. Ahora me ves, pero entonces te será imposible distinguir los contornos de tu cuerpo. Sin embargo, estaré con ustedes, los acompañaré en la peregrinación larga y a veces podrás ver la huella de mis pies en la arena. Por fin, Mexicli se atrevió a hablar sin osar contemplar el rostro de su Dios. ¿Cómo sabremos dónde detenernos? ¿Cómo sabremos dónde fundar ese mundo que será nuevo? La señal será muy clara, Mexicli, príncipe y espejo mío. Llegarán a una laguna de color de las turquesas, ojo de la madre de la falda de agua, un islote en la laguna, en él un nopal en el que estará posado un águila que sostendrá en sus garras una serpiente. El lugar a muchos les parecerá inhóspito, imposible levantar en él no ya un templo, sino una casa tan solo. Pero tú podrás ver con el ojo de la mente y ahí fundarás el nuevo Aztlán. A su tiempo acudirán las garzas con su blanco vuelo y surgirá una ciudad rodeada por círculos de luz, cual pluma de quetzal. ¿Qué nombre habremos de ponerle?, preguntó el príncipe, casi ebrio de futuro. El tuyo, Mexicli, espejo mío, tu lugar, tu asiento, México, los cimientos del cielo. Así que es una versión muy durita, ¿no? O sea, entonces always no se apega completamente quizá a las versiones aztecas, pero sí para un niño sí parece de ensueño, parece mágico, y eso es lo que quieren, ¿no? Atraparlos y llevarlos a estos tiempos distantes. Y como hay un montón de libros muy buenos que les recomiendo, como el cuento de los Bacabes, el cuento de Huracán. A los niños les va a fascinar saber que hurricane and huracán come from Maya religion, and the Maya religion took it from the Taino people of the Caribbean. I mean, this is an ancient word, God of storms, the God of chaos. Kukulkan, which is his brother, the feathered serpent, the Aztec of Quetzalcoatl. And then the story of the Nahuatl, the shape-shifting witch that's so important in Olmec and Toltec and Zapotec and all these different mythologies. The idea that each person has, each person born in Mesoamerica has like I hesitate to use the word spirit animal, but they have like this animal soul, that their tonali that's connected to the day of their birth, and that for some people can be brought out and it can transform into the animal. So it's really, and kids just eat that stuff up. getting really close to the end here. We have about 10 minutes to go. Like I was telling you, I'm taking some of these myths that I've retold and feathers from our dark sky and pulling them out. The first one that we're doing is the Dwarf King, which we're calling it the Rise of the Halfling King. And I don't like the word dwarf in English because it's, it has all these connotations and it's kind of negative or whatever. And it implies something other than what the myth is, that he's half Irish. And so this is, we created the publisher created this like postcard. We gave it out at an American Library. Spring of 2020, there's it's going to be full color, but here's a black and white panel from it. So you can see there is the halfling learning how to write using old Mayan characters. One way in to all this, as I've suggested to you, is using border legends. And there are some great bilingual picture books and collections out there that I would recommend to you. Javier Garza, who was a teacher at that school, at AP Silvis Middle School, the year that I realized what I needed to do, he was the art teacher across the hall, and we would come together during lunch and eat in the teacher's lounge there. Not the mean one where everybody was complaining about kids, but in this little one over there where we could like talk about what we want to do. He's the one who introduced me to the really, really cool book, Stories That Must Not Die. Have you ever seen this book? It's like red, and it's got black lettering on it, and it's got a sword. It's like really freaky, and it's in English and Spanish. Oh, kids love that book so much. And I remember sitting there and dreaming with them about wanting to be authors. And he's an illustrator and an author, and he was working on something, and I was working on something, and we shared with each other. And then here we are, many years later, and we were both award-winning authors. Kind of cool. He's got a couple of picture books that I really recommend that are bilingual, right? Yeah, right. Zulema and the Witch Hour, Zulema y la Lechuza, and then Juan and the Chupacabras, or Juan y el Chupacabras. Those are also great books for younger kids that explore legends in a way that's really, really great. Then he's got this collection of shorter stories that are great for like 2nd through 5th grade called The Donkey Lady Fights La Llorona and Other Stories. And I've actually included a PDF of that. He gave me a PDF of, not the final version, but of like, it was essentially the final. There's like a couple of little typos here. And he gave that to me and says that you guys should like use it as much as you want. Just invite him to your school if you ever. Have you ever had him at your school? Have you ever had him? Oh man, he's great. He's a great storyteller. So the Donkey Lady Fights La Llorona. Do you know who the Donkey Lady is? Have you ever heard that? Donkey Lady? She's like San Antonio's version of La Llorona. Like she does everything the same, excepto que tiene cara de asno. No sé por qué le pusieron la señora asna en vez de la señora burra. A lo mejor soy feo, ¿no? Then there's, so Javier Garza is from Rio Grande City. He's from the Valley. René Salazar Jr. is also from the Valley, from Benitez. He's now a professor at, what's the name of the university? Laredo? Not Laredo, I mean. Not Laredo, in Lubbock.
Texas Tech?
Yeah, Texas Tech. He's a professor at Texas Tech. And he's got lots of really great books, but one that I really recommend for this kind of thing, telling legends, is his Dancing with the Devil and Other Tales from Beyond, Bailando con el Diablo y otros cuentos del más allá, que más bien es como para niños de cuarto y quinto, o sea, no, pero tiene una versión de La Llorona bien padre. Another great picture book is The Cucuy Stole My Cascarones. El Coco me robó los cascarones. No sé por qué le pusieron el Coco. And then a series that I was involved in that has illustrations by Javier Garza and other illustrators is called Strange Texas Tales That Never Die. There are 4 volumes. Volumes 2, 3, and 4 are just stories written by me in English and in Spanish that are probably appropriate from 3rd grade and up. So those are really, really great. They're like rip-offs of the Strange Texas Tales that I was telling you about. I mean the stories that must not die. They have red covers also, and they have like a mesquite in black. So these are great things for you. Some of them I have included in there. And also in the Combicuero, I have some legends included as well, but told in poetry form. So I've got a poem about the Nahuatl, the shapeshifter, that is basically Huevo's Uncle Joe, they're at a ranch and he's telling them a story about Nahuatl and how they come and they steal livestock from them. Then there's the story of the poem Trickster, which is like a little more like mythology based. It's about how he decides to make the mask that he's wearing on the cover. You see him wearing the mask of the feathered coyote. And then there's the story of La Mano Pachona, which is the story, him remembering being told the story of La Mano Pachona and about how it was going to like come out of the toilet, falling into the sewer, which is what my grandmother told me when I was misbehaving. So kids love that poem. They really love La Mano Pachona. And then there's La Lechuza Outside My Window, which is about a poem about this, him being afraid, even at age 12, thinking back to the story his grandmother told him about La Lechuza, who's still a little boy, and like getting freaked out because he wakes up in the middle of the night and there's actually a lechuza sitting on the mesquite tree outside of his window, and he decides that he's going to go sleep in his little brother's bedroom, even though he knows his little brother can't protect him, but he just will feel like better. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. Like I sleep better when I'm at home, even though there's like nobody in my house that can do anything. Like I would have to be the person to do the protecting if something were to happen, but I just sleep better just with everybody there. I don't know, it's really weird. It's terribly when I go on book tours or whatever, and in hotels, like this book tour I went on for this one, the Chupacabras of the Rio Grande, which is I co-wrote with Adam Gidwitz. We went on a book tour for like 6 weeks, and I got so little sleep when I came back. It took me like 2 weeks to like recuperate. So just don't sleep well when I'm not. Okay, so really quickly, we've got like very little time before lunch. Like, essentially, we have no time, but I'm going to take 2 or 3 minutes. Could you really quickly, just with a table, with a partner, like one other person?
De ese plan que tenemos, y que hacemos que los niños vayan a la casa y traigan una leyenda que sus padres les han contado.
¿Fue idea de usted?
Y también, luego buscamos como en el periódico las lloronas del día de hoy, que están presas porque ellas también han ido a las hijos por venganza.
Y comparamos y contrastamos.
No, pues por sí, fíjense, o sea, eventualmente saldrá en español, pero lo que tratamos de hacer con este libro tiene lugar en Laredo, en la frontera, y la serie es sobre un par de niños que van con su profesor, que es de Perú, pero ellos viven en Nueva Jersey, y van a diferentes lugares ayudando a rescatar criaturas legendarias. Entonces, van a Laredo y trabajan con unos niños mexicoamericanos para rescatar un chupacabras que ha sido un chupacabras bebé, que ha sido separado de su familia por la construcción del muro fronterizo. Entonces, fue una oportunidad para hacer un comentario social accesible para niños jóvenes, y mucha gente, o sea, ha recibido muy buena crítica, pero también hay gente que dice, I don't want my kids to be reading about the wall, the border wall. I just want them to have fun. And like, that's why we're in the situation we're in, because 50% of our population wants to pretend like you're not hurting us, and you are hurting us. And so, le regalo este libro. Okay?
All right.
Anybody else? Usted dígale, no. Ya te dieron.
Pero le di el crédito que hizo.
Sí, gracias por darle crédito, eso estuvo muy bien.
You already have one.
Anybody else have an idea about like what they would share? Kind of myth? Otra idea sobre una leyenda, un mito.
Y otra leyenda que trajeron los niños, porque esto lo hicimos el año pasado, es de que cuando juegas lotería después de las 12 de la noche te sale el diablo.
Sí.
Para nosotros es jugar la baraja.
Eso me suena a una mamá que dice, ¿cómo voy a hacer que dejen de...?
Para nosotros eran los adultos.
Ok, bueno.
Si se llegaban las 3 de la mañana, cierran todo, y según a una prima dice que a ella sí se le pareció el diablo.
Y el niño contó la historia de su abuelo, de su abuela.
Mi prima contó el cuento de cuando ella le salió el diablo, era hábito de ellos, estar jugando la baraja, jugando todas las noches, hasta que un día le dijo a su mamá, oye, ya dejen de estar jugando, después de las 3 es cuando les va a salir el diablo. Y dice ella que esa noche cuando ella se fue, le salió el diablo. And I don't remember the whole story because it's been a while since I heard it. I was like maybe 10 or 12 when she told me that story.
Well, for sharing that, I'm going to give you this. This is a little, it's a little reader that I did for Benchmark. They're trying to do like these like leveled readers for riddles, and this one is based on some stories from the ancient Maya. Unfortunately, one of the things that I struggle with, this is one of the problems we have publishing, is it's from 1,000 years ago. And the Maya should be wearing, like the men should not have shirts, they should be wearing, but they were like, well, we can't do that, because, you know, whatever. So they illustrated it, and they look like awfully modern for me, but it's a cool story, and I think you did. Thank you for being so attentive. Hopefully, I've given you guys some things to think about. The PDFs that I'm giving you will have lots of things to choose from. I just want to make sure you have lots of resources that you can make decisions about how to better center social studies curriculum in the identity, culture, and community of these kids, so that they will realize that their lives matter. They matter just in moral terms. They matter in terms of academics. They are things that we should be studying and understanding and you know, like digging deep into. They are just as important as the histories and lives that are more typically told about in social studies curriculum. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Oh, there's my contact information right away. So there's my website, davidbowles.us. You can email me at bowlesdo@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy to answer.
Remember, he
compañeros de ese plan que tenemos, y que hacemos que los niños vayan a la casa